Welcome back to our video series on research articles. In today's episode, we will be discussing an essential component of any research article, the hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement that predicts the relationship between variables in a study. It serves as the foundation for the entire research process. Hypotheses are formulated based on existing knowledge, theories, or observations, and serve as the foundation for the research study. When reading a research article, you will often come across a section called the introduction. This is where the hypothesis is typically presented. The hypothesis is formulated based on the research question, which is the main problem the study aims to address. Obviously, this will be accepted or rejected at the beginning of the discussion section. Here are some types of research hypotheses commonly used in these fields: null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, directional hypothesis, non-directional hypothesis, research hypothesis, associative and causal hypothesis, empirical hypothesis, statistical hypothesis. Null hypothesis. This hypothesis states that there is no significant relationship or difference between variables. It assumes that any observed differences are due to chance or random variation. Researchers aim to reject the null hypothesis to support an alternative hypothesis. Check this example. There is no significant difference in blood pressure levels between patients who receive medication A and those who receive a placebo. There is no significant association between dental hygiene practices and the occurrence of cavities. Alternative hypothesis H1. This hypothesis proposes a specific relationship or difference between variables. Researchers aim to gather evidence to support the alternative hypothesis and reject the null hypothesis. Example: patients who receive medication A will have significantly lower blood pressure levels compared to those who receive a placebo. Another example: there is a significant association between frequent brushing and flossing and a lower incidence of cavities. To determine whether the null hypothesis should be rejected, we set a significance level, often denoted as alpha. This level represents the probability of making a type 1 error, which is rejecting the null hypothesis when it is actually true. Commonly used significance levels are 0.5 or 0.1. It's important to remember that even if a study fails to reject the null hypothesis, it does not prove that the null hypothesis is true. It simply means that there is not enough evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. This is known as a type 2 error, where a true relationship between variables goes undetected. Directional hypothesis. This hypothesis predicts the direction of the relationship or difference between variables. It specifies whether the effect will be positive increase or negative decrease. For example, increasing dosage of medication A will lead to a greater reduction in blood pressure levels. See also this one: the more frequently individuals brush their teeth, the lower their risk of developing cavities. Non-directional hypothesis. This hypothesis does not predict the direction of the relationship or difference between variables as mentioned in the previous type. It only suggests that a relationship or difference exists. Check this. There is a significant relationship between medication A and blood pressure levels. There is a significant association between dental hygiene practices and the occurrence of cavities. Research hypothesis. A research hypothesis is a specific statement that posits a relationship or difference between variables based on existing theory or prior observations. It is usually more specific and focused than a general research question. These are some of the common types of research hypotheses. The specific type of hypothesis chosen depends on the research objectives, the variables being investigated, and the nature of the research study. It's important to formulate hypotheses that are testable and measurable to guide the research. Example: increased exposure to sunlight leads to higher levels of vitamin D in the body. Associative and causal hypothesis. Associative and causal hypotheses don't exhibit how many variables there will be. They define the relationship between the variables. In an associative hypothesis, changing any one variable, dependent or independent, affects others. In a causal hypothesis, the independent variable directly affects the dependent. Associative hypotheses focus on the relationship between variables. Causal hypotheses aim to establish a cause and effect connection. For example, increased consumption of sugary beverages is associated with higher rates of obesity among adolescents. Regular physical exercise decreases the risk of developing cardiovascular diseases. Empirical hypothesis, also referred to as the working hypothesis. An empirical hypothesis claims a theory's validation via experiments and observation. This way, the statement appears justifiable and different from a wild guess. Say, the hypothesis is, women who take iron tablets face a lesser risk of anemia than those who take vitamin B12. This is an example of an empirical hypothesis where the researcher the statement after assessing a group of women who take iron tablets and charting the findings. Statistical hypothesis. The point of a statistical hypothesis is to test an already existing hypothesis by studying a population sample. Hypotheses like 44% of the Canadian population belong in the age group of 20–27. Leverage evidence to prove or disprove a particular statement. There are several common mistakes that researchers may make. Here are some examples. Lack of clarity. The hypothesis should be clear and specific, stating the relationship between variables. For example, there is a relationship between dental hygiene and oral health. This statement lacks clarity as it does not specify the nature of the relationship. Lack of testability. Hypothesis should be testable and measurable. Overgeneralization. Hypotheses should be focused and specific to avoid overgeneralization. Lack of literature review. It is important to conduct a thorough literature review before formulating a hypothesis. Failing to review existing research can lead to redundant or irrelevant hypotheses. Unsupported assumptions. Hypotheses should be based on evidence and logical reasoning. Making unsupported assumptions can weaken the hypothesis. In conclusion, research hypotheses play a crucial role in guiding the research process and providing a clear direction for investigation. They serve as a foundation for designing research studies and help researchers focus their efforts on specific objectives. That's all for today's video on research article hypotheses. I hope you found it informative and helpful. Stay tuned for more episodes in our research article series. Happy researching!